Hey guys, it's Logan again. Welcome to part 1 of developing a server in Java for GameMaker Studio 2, a server that we're going to be using to create a multiplayer framework in GameMaker. So this video is going to be the beginning of a crash course in Java because we have to go through some basic Java stuff before we can get into developing the server. So hopefully you've watched my previous video and you've downloaded Eclipse and you have the Java JDK installed. So let's go ahead and open Eclipse, and I have Java Oxygen or Eclipse Oxygen, which is the newest version, and that hopefully that's what you downloaded as well. And then you're going to be greeted with this workspace. You can create a new workspace. This is just a folder that your projects will be placed in. And I already have a workspace created. It's just in my documents. It's called Eclipse Workspace. There we go. So now it's going to load it up. All right, so we're greeted with this screen. Don't worry about this game server thing. That's a previously closed project. So we're greeted with our user interface. It's quite nice, really. So what we need to do is create a new project, and you'll see Package Explorer to the left over here. And this is where our projects are for Eclipse, or in our workspace. So you can just right-click over here. So I'm creating a new project, Java crash course tutorial. So you hopefully you'll see these two files. You can use your execution environment. I have multiple JDKs installed, so I'm using a project specific JRE. And if you don't see a drop down menu right here with different versions or your installed version 1.5.2, then go to configure JRE, this blue tab button, and you're going to hit add. And standard VM's fine, and you're going to hit directory, and then you're going to find your installation of Java here. So on mine it would be C, program files, Java, and then you select the appropriate JDK. Make sure you select the JDK, not the JRE, and select that file and hit OK. And then it should add it, and you hit finish, and then it should be added, check mark it, and you're set. What that is the library of code that you can access, the Java code, okay? So I have mine that I want selected, apply and close, and finish. There we go. So now I have a new project that just opened. And you'll see you should have your JDK system library right here. Once again, this is all the code that you can access, all the code that's built in for Java that you can use. Libraries, and you can add additional libraries later on. Java is really good with having additional libraries and easy to add other people's libraries that they make things easier for you, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, then you see the SRC file. This is the source. This is where all your code will go, your code files. So you can think of a code file. It's called a class in Java. You can think of a class as an object. Basically, that's what it is. It's an object in GameMaker. Like an object in GameMaker is equivalent to a class in Java. Okay, and you're going to right-click that folder and you're going to hit New, and then you're going to select Class. Okay. And really, this is all we're ever going to be adding is classes. We might get into packages later on, but for now, we're just going to be using classes. Packages are just a way to organize your classes and get certain keywords and stuff so they don't mess with each other. It's hard to explain. We'll get to it one day. All right, so we're going to hit class. We made a new class. Now we have to give it a name. Don't worry about anything else, just the name field. And we're going to name this application, okay? This is going to be our entry point for our project code, okay? And then we're going to hit finish, and it's going to create a class, and it created the default package, or it put the class in this package. And that's just fine. So you see we have public class. And right now, our code will do nothing. If we hit run, go ahead and hit run, it'll say the selection cannot be launched and there's no recent launches. That's fine. If we right click our application.java file and we go down to run as, you'll see that we don't really have any options. We just have run configurations, and we aren't going to go into that right now. So we can't actually run the program. And why is that? Well, we don't have an entry point to run our program. So in Java, you need a main method, and I'll show you exactly what that is. If you type in main and hit control space, a little bit laggy there, and then hit enter, see this main method, or click it, you'll get this main method. And this is now the entry point of our program. So now if you right click application.java and go to run as, you'll see Java application appears. You can click it, and this is our console down here. It actually ran. It didn't do anything. It ran and closed. It's done. It terminated. And that's just fine. So this is the entry point to an application. Don't worry about the public static void stuff yet. I'm going to explain that in probably the next video. And you'll see the keyword main. If it didn't auto-generate for you, just type this out. It'll be the same thing. String args right here. This is, let's say you made a Java application and you wanted, when you first ran the application from like command prompt or something, you wanted to be able to pass like some arguments in to make it run differently. That's what this is. This is an array of strings. A string is a text. We're going to go over that. And basically, args is the variable name. So you could actually access it with like args0 would be the first command that was passed into the program. So you could use this for different things, okay? Okay, so the first thing that we're going to talk about is variables and how to use them in Java, okay? So we have our entry point now. And when we get to Java, we actually have to assign data types. If you don't know what data types are, I'm going to link the my data types and memory video. Please go watch those. It's going to clear some things up with how bits are stored in memory and what bytes are. So in GameMaker, when we make a variable, the data type is assigned automatically, and basically every variable you create in GameMaker is the same data type. It's a floating point value. So it is actually, even if you use 1 as a variable value in GameMaker, it is actually 1.0, okay? It actually has a decimal, and it actually has a number after the decimal. Even though you don't see it, that's what it gets converted down into. And beyond that, GameMaker actually has its own data types that everything is kind of gathered around. So that's why you can switch a variable from being 1, and then you can, like, let's say I had a variable called health. I could switch it from being 1. I could even assign it health equals 1.0, because though it's the same thing. I could even do health equals true. That would even work. You would assign a value, because in GameMaker, true is actually just a constant for 1.0, okay? So everything in GameMaker is the same data type, and that's why you can kind of assign different things to the same variable, just like this. I could assign all kinds of different types of values. But when we get to Java and other strongly typed languages, we actually have to define what the type of our variable is. That's why it was giving me an error. So if I wanted to make a variable called health, and I want to set it to 100, it's actually going to give me an error, because it's going to say health cannot be resolved to a variable. It doesn't know that this is a variable because we haven't done what we called declaring it. And how we declare it is we give it a type. So what are the types that we have in Java? We have integers, which you can declare with the int. We have doubles, and I'm going to explain these a bit more in a moment. Double, and let's say we wanted speed to be a double, and we wanted to assign that to 100. This is actually going to give us, oh, it doesn't give us an error, I guess, but what it actually does is turn this 100 into a 100.0 when it goes into memory, okay? Because a double is a number that has a 0 after it has a decimal. An integer cannot have a decimal. Let's see what happens if we put a decimal after an integer. It actually is going to give us an error because this is not an integer value, it's a double value. And what we can actually do in Java is cast some things. I'm not going to go into how it's determined if we can cast something. What I mean by cast is convert. We can convert a double value into an integer using this parenthesis thing right here. So if you ever see me use this, that's what I'm doing. I'm converting this into an int. So this is basically downcasting is what it's called. So when this happens, when this value gets assigned to health, it actually strips away the decimal, okay? And it just uses these three numbers. So even if you add 100.9, it would go into health as 100. It just strips away that decimal point. So that's what casting is. Okay, so we have integers, we have doubles that are 0.0. We also have floats, which you could also do. Let's do max speed equals 100.0. This is, once again, another type of item with the decimal, but it's slightly different. We're not going to get into the technicals. We probably won't even use floats most of the time. But in order to initialize it, you actually have to use an F to say, hey, this is a float, not a double, okay? Okay, so we have ints, floats, doubles, we have bytes, and this will be like X position or something. Let's say 100, okay? Or 199, that's fine. I accidentally typed it. And what is the difference between a integer and a byte? They look the same, right? Well, the difference is that a byte we can only have up to 256, the value 256, because of the way it's stored in memory. So a byte is literally 1 byte of memory. It can only store a number that is so large, right? If you go over that number, then it's going to error out, basically. So why can we store like a very large integer, right? We could store like a big number as an integer, okay? Not that big. You can see it said out of range. So even an integer has a maximum value. So let's see how many zeros we had when it gave us that error. Okay, so it actually gave us this error when we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 zeros. So we can only have 10 digits total, or that's not necessarily true. It's just a certain number. But you see that we get an error that we can't go too big, just like a byte. If we can't actually go too large on a byte, okay? And the reason is because once again, an integer is maybe 4 bytes, okay? So after we get to a number so large that it can't be represented by 4 bytes anymore, we need another data type. So maybe we could use what's called a long. So you could say long big number equals, and you could see we could get many more numbers in this one. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this error. So for a long, we actually have to use long, the L. I kind of forgot it for a second. So we actually have to use an L for a long. Let's see how far we can go. I don't know the exact values for these. There we go. So we went over the range. This is kind of the maximum number that we can have right now. But these are the main ones we're going to be working with. We're probably not going to use long for anything that I could foresee. A byte is good for memory efficient areas where you're not going to be going over 256, the value 256. Integers probably the most used for things that you can count, and doubles are used for things, especially when you're using division and things like that, okay? So those are our different primitive data types. What I mean by primitive type is this gets directly stored in memory as a byte sequence. And there are non-primitive types, such as like a string. We have to give a name to this. So let's say string name equals, and then remember this is text, so it's quotes. So what's the difference between a string and these values? Well, the difference is that string is not a regular data type. It's an object, okay? So it's actually another class in the Java library. So if I hit F3, it's actually going to take me to that class. See? Public final class string. And in every language, a string is this. It's an object or some representation of different characters. So let's go ahead and examine what a string is. So it's a class, and it's a class that contains an array of characters, which we didn't talk about. I'll go ahead and explain that. A char is just a character, basically, right? So it's, let's say, char letter equals, and you represent a character with single quotes and then a letter, okay? So that's a character. This actually gets turned into a 1 byte number. And so you could say that a char and a byte represent they don't represent the same thing necessarily. A char takes as much space in memory as a byte. They both take, 1 byte, 1 byte, okay? And yeah, that's that. And a string is simply a array of characters. I mean, that's obvious. So what we can actually do is we could say, we could make a byte array that is seen in the string class. You make an array by using, you give it the type and then give it square brackets saying, hey, this isn't just a byte. It's actually going to be an array of bytes. An array is just a list, right? So you just say, I'm going to have an array of bytes, and I'm going to name this array, let's say letters. And then we're going to assign it. You can actually assign a new array like this. We can put the values we want in that. Actually, this is going to be an array of chars, not bytes, sorry. And let's give it a few characters. Let's say A, B, C. And we can actually create a string out of this array by using a new string after that. And then we have to pass in some letters, or a array of characters. So we could say letters. And that's actually going to create a string of ABC, the letters ABC. As simple as that. And you can actually see this. If I hit F3 on this new string, it's actually going to take us to the constructor, where this string takes in an array of characters, and it sets its value to equal, this is a function of the arrays class, a copy of whatever's passed in. Okay, so it's actually just grabbing all those bytes and concatenating it into its own value. And you can actually see its value is just an array of characters. And in GameMaker, that's what it is. It's an array of characters. In any language, that's what a string is. It's an array of characters. It's a list of characters. So it's not actually a primitive data type. It's a created data type. Java created this data type. It's not something that is just directly stored in memory. The individual characters are stored in the memory, and the string just accesses those characters. Okay, we talked enough about strings now. And we can get rid of this. And once again, you don't have to use that new string or this letters thing. We could get the same effect with ABC. This is going to make a new string with the characters ABC. And that's how we initialize characters. So next, we're going to talk real quickly about a couple of loops, like for loops and while loops, that we'll be using, and as well as doing some stuff with arrays. Okay, so you have your different data types. You could play with these, and you can add stuff together. For instance, you could add health plus equal, let's say x, which is our byte value. Okay, and you can see that this doesn't actually give us an error, because it can actually convert this to an integer, or it can add them together anyway. But what happens if we do health, which is an integer, plus equal speed? Well, it's actually going to work, because once again, remember, we can downcast from a double to an integer. So it's actually going to take the 0 off of this. If you were to put 100.5 and add it to health, it would actually get rid of that 0.5, and it would just give you that 100 plus whatever this is. So if that's a 1 and this is a 1.5, and you added these two values together, would actually just give you 2. It wouldn't give you 2.5. Okay. So what happens if we did speed, which is a double, plus equal health? Well, in this case, it's actually going to cast this 1 to a double. It's actually going to add a 0.0 on the end of it. Okay, which isn't going to make the value really do much. It's just going to the answer, the value of speed would be 2.0. I mean, that's kind of obvious, right? Now, what happens if we try to add max speed to speed? Well, it's just simply going to do what you think it would. It would add the 0.0 or whatever's after the decimal onto that. But it's not going to be, the precision isn't the same when you're adding a float to a double, okay? And we can go into that later on, not a big deal. Now, what happens if we added max speed to health? Well, it's going to be the same thing as speed to the health. It's going to get rid of after the decimal points, okay? Awesome. So anyway, you can mess around with that, and you can kind of try it. The things you can't do are dividing by certain values and stuff like that. And there's certain restrictions on this stuff, but we're not going to get too far into that. I'm already 20 minutes in this video, so let's go ahead and get into the different arrays and stuff like that. So like we did earlier, we can define an array, which is just a list, by typing the type of value we want with square brackets and giving the array a name. Usually you use plural because this is multiple values. So we could say speeds, let's do int, let's say documents equals, and you don't have to specify the exact values right here. You can give it just maybe a size. You can give it, let's see, new int, and let's give it a size of 10, initial size of 10. And why do we have to use new here? It's going to give us an error if we don't use new. And the reason is because an array is actually an object. If you have an array of something, it's actually going to be an object. So you need to use the keyword new when we create new objects in GameMaker. So int by itself is a primitive value. An array of ints is actually an object. So to create a new object, we have to use the keyword new. This is like instance create in GameMaker, okay? And we'll get more into that in the next video as well. So we created this documents array with a size of 10. So you have assigned in memory enough space to hold 10 integers. Now let's loop through this array and let's assign some values to it. So we can use a for loop, and we can use for int I, because remember in GameMaker you could just use I, but here we have to specify what the value is. It's an integer. Int I equals 0. I is less than, as long as I is less than, we can use what we call length, kind of like GameMaker, documents dot length. That's going to get the length of this array, which is going to be 10. And then semicolon, and we could do I++, and whatever's in here, we can assign a value. Right now, there's not any values assigned inside of this. Actually, I think it might assign it to 0 automatically since it's an int and not an integer. We'll go into the difference. So let's actually print them out. Let's print all the values out into our console. So let me show you how you can print stuff into the console. We'll be using this a lot for debugging and all kinds of stuff. We use system, which is an object. And we use out, which is going to reference, it's static, it's going to reference another object. And we use print line, print ln, which is going to print something and go to a new line. If you don't use ln, it's just going to print on the same line as long as you go. And this is kind of like show debug message in GameMaker. And what we're going to print is the value of documents at the position I, okay? And we can actually run this now. We can hit the play button up here, run application, or if it's not there, you can go run as, right click your thing, run as Java application. And you can see it actually printed 0000000 out, because it actually, for an int, there's no way to not initialize it. So when you create this array, it initializes all the values automatically as 0. So let's go ahead and initialize a value right before we print it out. So we could say documents I equals, let's say 100, or let's say I times 2. So all the values are going to have different values. So this is going to go 0 times 2 is 0, 1 times 2 is 2, 2 times 2 is 4, and we should get that pattern when we run. So we can go up here and hit play, and you're going to see 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18. Awesome. So now we've created an array of ints, and you could do the same thing with any of these values. So I'm going kind of fast. Let's go ahead and go over what we've learned. So we've learned that there's different value types. Our most used are going to be int and double, okay? If we need to get really big into numbers, we'll use longs. And our second most used is probably going to be a string. We may even use character and byte, which remember, they're both 1 byte apiece, but a character is kind of a, it's what's stored inside of a string. It's one single letter that can be represented by 1 byte. And then we've went over arrays and how to kind of initialize arrays, and this kind of initializes some of the size. Remember, we can also do this. So you can give it curly brackets, and then you can do that, and then we can actually print that out now. And that's actually going to print out our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you can actually initialize the values of an array just like this if you don't want to go through the hassle of initializing the size and then initializing this. Okay, awesome. So, and then in addition, we went over a for loop. Okay, sweet. So I hope this kind of got you introduced into Java, and it's not really all that difficult. As you can see, there's going to be a lot more to go over, but this is a kind of first introduction. I encourage you to, now that you know this basic stuff, you can go maybe watch a couple other videos elsewhere to go over some basics. There's a few videos go over Java in 1 hour, and it'll show you like everything in Java in 1 hour. So yeah, go ahead and get on that, and I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.